we were arrested for the murder of 3 boys in West Memphis, Arkansas, where the police said that these murders were carried out as part of a satanic ritual, some sort of human sacrifice. We sat in prison until 2011. Keep in mind, DNA testing is constantly progressing. Even now, they can do DNA testing that they couldn't do whenever I got out. But by 2011, they could do DNA testing that was not available at the time we were arrested. So the results came back showing that not only did the DNA found at the crime scene not match me or the other 2 guys, it matched one of the victim's family members. We were released not too long after that, but even now we're still going, like I said, DNA, they can do tests now that they couldn't even do back then. So we're in the process right now of doing even more DNA testing to hopefully give us more evidence to completely clear our names. And they're saying that it should be finished in July. I don't hold my breath on that stuff anymore because I've heard that over and over, but that's what I'm being told.
Are they then going to go after who it is they identify in the DNA?
They don't have to. They don't have to do anything. You know, like it's entirely up to the state. The state has done every single thing that they could to hinder us even doing this testing, getting this testing done. Like we wanted to test everything found at the crime scene. Like even right now, they have hair found from the crime scene that they still will not let us test. We wanted to test the victim's clothing. We wanted to test sticks that were found there at the crime scene. And to this day, the prosecutor is still doing everything that they possibly can to hold this up or prevent it from happening.
What is the Alchemy of the Broken Blade about?
It is basically about how I survived during those 20 years. Not just survived, but thrived. I had to figure out a way to live so that I did not go stark raving insane or just completely and absolutely disintegrate the way so many people in that situation and in that environment did. So it's about things like finding purpose for your life and how to do that. And, you know, when I was in prison, the thing that allowed me to survive was not really focusing on my circumstances, on my situation. It was creating a life for myself, creating some sort of structure, finding things that I love doing, even in that environment, and pouring myself into them with my whole heart. You know, I use the example of Timothy Leary whenever he went to prison for doing the LSD experiments. At one point, Ram Dass goes to visit him and he tells Timothy Leary, we've come up with a plan and we're going to break you out of here. And Timothy Leary says, you can't do that. I've got too much work to do. That was how I started to feel by the time I got out of prison towards the end. There were entire days that would pass when I didn't even think about the fact that I was in prison anymore because I was so deeply immersed into the life that I had created for myself that I wasn't paying attention to that. So that's what I'm trying to introduce people to.
Tell me more about what that is, because I hear stories of I must be dependent on the environment of the particular prison you're in. I hear people of teaching themselves, you know, laws and going to libraries and things. And then I hear about other people within the system who become sort of conciliaries, you know, teach other newcomers how to get on in the system and how to, they're sort of service to them. What was your thing? What did you do?
For me, it was internal alchemy. You know, one of the things that horrified me the most about being in prison is I would see how so many people in there never really changed. You know, they never really grew. I would see men come in the door and 10, 15 years later, they were the exact same person that they were when they walked in. They had stopped developing. And that horrified me. You know, I did not want to be like that. So I was constantly exploring ways to change myself, make myself grow. You know, you have to give yourself some sort of stimulus in there because, you know, noon is the same as midnight, or the 4th of July is the same as Christmas. Yeah. You live in a vacuum. Yeah. You have to create some way to change yourself. And for me, what it was Western esotericism and internal alchemy.
So how did you get access to those ideas?
That was another thing. If people are more interested, if they want to know more about like the details of the case, there's been many documentaries made out about it. There were 3 titled Paradise Lost, another one titled West Memphis, been countless shows. But people who saw those documentaries and TV shows and read articles about the case while I was in there started to come together and try to figure out what they could do to help in some way. One of those things that they would do to help would be stuff like, they would tell me, send us a list of books that you want. And people out here started to send me reading material, books. I would correspond with people. While I was in there, I developed a relationship with the head abbot of a 300-year-old Zen temple in Japan who would eventually become my teacher. I received ordination in the Rinzai Zen tradition of Japanese Buddhism while I was in there. It was the same tradition that used to train the samurai in ancient Japan. So it came from all different sorts of directions. In a lot of ways, I was really, really blessed while I was in there in that regard.
When you talk about the internal alchemy, is that Zen? Is that Zen Buddhism?
It's Zen, but through a Western lens. It tries to accomplish the same aim, the same purpose, which is to help us not believe or have faith that we are not this independent self that we believe we are, but that we are the field of consciousness behind the self. We are this consciousness that's what we think we are arises from and will one day dissolve back into. It's a process of experiencing that firsthand, not believing it or reading it in a book or any of that sort of stuff, but knowing it to be true because you have went through that process.
Through some sort of meditation practice?
Meditation, visualization, breath work, a lot of the same things that you would find in traditions like Taoism or some of the more esoteric aspects of Buddhism. It's the exact same things, only through a Western lens. For example, instead of using like bodhisattvas and Buddhas and things like that, we would use archangels and Hebrew God names, things of that nature.
Going back to the original sort of reason you were put in prison, you called it what did you call it? The sort of preoccupation people had with the occult?
At that time period, the Satanic Panic, was that?
Satanic Panic. And what was that and where did that come from? Was that, because I remember a lot of devil talk back in the 70s, and people were sort of weirdly panicked about the devil for a minute. And the devil was taking over bulldozers and dogs and all kinds of, there was a killdozer. Yes. I mean, all kinds of crazy shit. But it was Satanic
also
Panic,
during the time.
Go ahead.
It was, this was also during the time when people were saying that heavy metal, albums had satanic messages and that if you played the album backwards, it would convince you to kill yourself, all of that sort of stuff.
Right. Right. And what caused that, in your opinion? Why did we get into that Satanic Panic?
To be honest, I have no earthly idea. I was a kid at the time. I was 18 when I was arrested. Whenever it started, Were you into that stuff? I mean, obviously you're prone to going down pathways and philosophical pathways. Were you into some of that stuff? Nothing related to Satanism at all. But what happens when you're talking about subjects like this, like alchemy, people hear that and they've been told, oh, that's dark, that's satanic. They don't really even comprehend what it is. They're just going on what someone else told them. So things get misconstrued and twisted, manipulated, that sort of stuff.
Now, did you spend time? Did I get this correct? Did you spend time in solitary confinement?
I did. I was in solitary confinement for almost the last 9 years that I was in prison. I was in for 18 years and 76 days. What's that?
The whole time you were in a solitary, those whole 9 years, or just in and out?
Yes, the whole time. Yes.
Why?
It's a long story. It has to do with how the system in Arkansas was getting money from the federal government and not doing what they said they were going to do with it. It was being pocketed, and the federal government says, this isn't what you told us you needed this money for. You said you needed it for security reasons. And it ends up with them taking everyone on death row and moving us over into a building that they had previously been using for storage and putting everyone on death row into solitary confinement. They used to brag. They would bring in tours of like politicians and stuff sometimes, and they would brag to them that death row was the most well-behaved population in the entire prison system, but we were also the ones under the strictest security. And
completely isolated all those years.
Absolutely. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They say that you're allowed outside for 1 hour a day, but what outside means is they take you out of your cell and put you in another concrete cell. The only difference being that there's no toilet or sink.
Jeez. And then you were able to get books and interact with people on the outside, though, in spite of that?
Through letters, and in the later years, phone calls.
And what was allowed to have young men?
They were in a completely different situation than I was. They were both in. I was in a super maximum security unit prison. They were both in like more normal prisons.
And why did you end up there?
Because I was the only one sentenced to death. One of the guys was sentenced to life plus 40 years. The other one was sentenced to, I believe, 3 life sentences, and I was given 3 death sentences.
Are they still in prison, the other 2?
No, they're out now also. And, going back to the solitary confinement thing, stuff like that, I think all 3 of us, due to just what we went through, what was done to us, you don't come out of that situation intact. It takes a lot of work to put yourself back together after going through something like that. And it's not fun to talk about it, a lot of times, because it takes you back into it. So both of them kind of stay away from it a little bit. They don't do a lot of interviews or talk to the press, just because they're trying to live their lives.
Yeah, this is a wild story. Caleb, you wanted to mention something about the McMartin case creating a lot. That in my head too. That's what I was connecting it in my head, and yet that wasn't specifically satanic.
Yeah, this is what I remember from reading about all these stories, especially around Damien's story as well. As around this same time, there was the newly popularized concept of repressed memories that came from a book called Michelle Remembers. Yes. And so it was, I didn't read the book, but I knew from browsing about it is that it was someone who was working with a psychiatrist and with this person who was saying that she had repressed memories of satanic ritual abuse. And then after that, it proceeded into around 1983, there was this preschool center called the McMartin Preschool Trial, where they had a bunch of kids that were saying, they're taking us underground for satanic ritual abuse stuff. They dug into it. They believed these repressed memories. And then it all came out that the kids were kind of being coerced into all of this. It was like QAnon decades before QAnon ever happened.
No, you're right. I actually remember... well, listen, I was working at a psych hospital when that was being brought up. I remember a couple of cases where they put them under an Amytal interview. They actually gave them pentobarbital, and it was so-called truth serum to see, what was real, could they remember, blah, blah, blah. I don't know that anything ever came of it, but there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on. And people who, remember they were up in Northern California or Modesto or something. There was supposedly a large circle of this kind of stuff going on. But yeah. I do remember this now. And I want to take a little break, if you don't mind. But Damien, when we come back, I'm just curious, what was it about your case that had them becoming so connected to the hysteria around Satanism and that stuff? And it wasn't even, I guess it was really about satanic group rituals where kids were damaged in certain ways, right? Isn't that sort of what the thinking was back then? All right, We're going to be back with Damien Echols right after this. Hey, Dr. Drew here, and we are interested in health and longevity, and the longevity nutrient is Fatty 15, discovered amazingly by a veterinarian who was responsible for the Navy's fleet of dolphins. Turns out dolphins are healthier when they have adequate amounts of pentadecanoic acid, which is C15. It also, for us, it helps humans as well, reduces the oxidative stress on our cell membranes, which is part of the aging process called ferroptosis. So she takes it, I take it, whole family takes it. And if you'd like some, go to drdrew.com/fatty15 for yours. There are discounts there.
Oh my God, look, Drew, it's a dolphin. Oh my gosh.
The book is The Alchemy of the Broken Blade, talking about how to make meaning where there seems to be no meaning. Wouldn't that be a reasonable way to describe the book?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, we are meaning-making machines, are we not?
Absolutely. It makes us able to survive things that we wouldn't be able to survive otherwise. You know, if you have a reason for going through something, then it's almost like you have a lifeline that pulls you out the other side.
A purpose. So before the break, I was asking, why was your case connected to that Satanic Panic?
I think it was a lot of reasons, one of which it was a really small town in the middle of the Bible Belt, West Memphis, Arkansas. And it was a horrific crime. You know, people were trying to figure out, why would someone do something like this? It kind of defied, you know, no one could comprehend it or wrap their mind around it. You know, they obviously weren't robbed.
Right.
We now know they weren't sexually abused. So people were wrestling, trying to come up with some kind of reason why something like this would have taken place. And that was, you know, in a place like that, that was the only reason that they could come up with.
And then how did they make that into a legal case that convicted 3 young males?
Honestly, they can make a legal case out of almost anything that they want to. You know, they presented things against us that they were considering evidence. You know, things like they brought up the fact that I read Stephen King books during trial. They brought up notebooks that I had kept when I was a teenager that actually had like passages from Shakespeare in it, and they said that this was satanic. So they just took whatever they could find and spun a story out of it.
So my other area of curiosity is, you know, you're a young person facing death. I mean, like, what did you think at first? How did you evolve? What was that? I'm probably, you don't even want to think about this, but if you're willing, I'm just wondering how you process something like that.
You know, this is one of those things that is absolutely impossible to articulate. I try to explain this to people, and I don't think many can comprehend it, but I can't really answer those questions anymore because I'm not that person. Like, that person died. The person that they did that to, the person that they put in that situation did not survive that situation, did not come out of that situation. So when I try to remember things like that, it's like trying to remember past lives. Like real past lives, you know, because I've been so many different people since that time period and had so many different experiences that it makes it almost impossible to reach back and find any of that stuff anymore. Like what I thought or what I felt, that sort of thing.
I'm going to push you on that a little bit in a second, but first, so many different experiences. What do you mean by that?
Well, just I don't even know where to start. You know, just all the things that I've done, all the different worlds that I've kind of delved into, you know, whether it's writing. This is like my 8th book. So, I went into writing for a long time, and that became my life. That became who I was. And before that, I used to do like visual art shows where every moment of the day was spent creating visual art for different shows, galleries around the world. Just, you know, things like that. Not even to mention, you know, when I was in prison, that's when my wife and I met. she's my wife now. We met in 96. We got married in 1999. And we created a world together. You know, she was the one who handled the case. When I was in prison, she handled all of this stuff so that I didn't even have to think about it. You know, a lot of times I did not even know what was going on in the case just because I could not focus on that sort of stuff, you know, what was happening outside, as well as maintaining my sanity and surviving on the inside. So, you know, even like our relationship was, you know, it feels like multiple lifetimes.
And what do you do with people that still accuse you of being guilty? How do you handle that? I
don't. You know, I've been called pretty much every name a human being can be called at one point or another. I've been tortured. I've been starved. Whatever a random person on the internet says probably isn't going to move the needle very much.
Right. That makes perfect sense. But back to your being so far, have grown. Would it be accurate to say you've grown so far from who you were when you entered prison, right? That's what it's
or even that, but also even since I got out.
Okay. Who were you when you went into prison?
I was a kid that grew up in complete and absolute poverty. You know, I had a 9th grade education. I dropped out of school when I got to 9th grade. And I think that's more than anybody in my family had. You know, you're not going to find people in my family with like college degrees or any of that. I come from a world where people work jobs that they absolutely hate until their bodies break down. They usually aren't going to go very far from where they were born. Just complete, absolute white trash, trailer park white trash. That was what I was. That was the world I came from. And that was also part of why they thought they could do to us what they did. They thought these are kids of you know, nobody's going to miss these kids. Nobody even knows who they are. These are just people that we can toss into this situation and move on.
You really should write about that too, it seems to me, or maybe you have you?
I don't believe that they made a mistake in this case. I think most of the people involved that did this to us, I think they knew from the very beginning that we didn't do this. And I don't think they cared. I think they just saw us as an easy way to get rid of a problem. Not only to get rid of that problem, but they also used it years later. Just about everybody involved used it as a platform to run for higher political office. You know, the judge went on to run for Senate. Yeah. Prosecutor went on to run for the Arkansas Supreme Court, all of that sort of stuff.
Ooh-wee. So how do you then go from that seemingly with, I mean, again, dropped out at 9th grade, no motivation to educate yourself or to grow, right? And were you working then when you went to before you went to prison? Did you have a job?
Most of them were like short-term dead-end jobs. You know, work at a gas station for a while, work construction for a little while, roofing, stuff like that. You know, nothing long-term, nothing you would want to do for the rest of your life. But you know, I always was hungry, very hungry as a child in a way that the rest of my family and the rest of my environment wasn't. You know, even when I would skip school and go to the library and spend the day in the library just reading. You know, I read nonstop, and I was always convinced that there had to be a better world out there somewhere, somehow, and I just didn't know how to reach it.
So that's interesting. So when I'm trying to figure out how you went from that kid who was dropping out of 9th grade to being so motivated to grow and find meaning, you had something already going on inside of you.
Yes, absolutely.
And the other two doesn't sound like they had that so much. Not being critical of them, they just didn't have this lust for knowledge, growth, meaning, something.
Well, one of them was mentally handicapped. You know, one of the youngest guy, or the middle guy, the guy who was 17, they said he had an IQ of, I believe, 72. You to begin with. So, he kind of didn't stand a chance.
Right. And did you at any point, obviously Zen is a kind of a religion, but did you have any sort of Western religion thoughts as you went through all this?
Not really religious in nature. To me, I don't really place a lot of, emphasis on what you believe, which is usually what religion is to me. For me, it's about like experience. Like I wanted to experience things firsthand, and you don't really experience a lot if you just accept a belief, if you just accept dogma. You have to put yourself through a process if you want to experience something. So for me, it was always more about like the experience of it and wanting to know, not believe what's real or not hope for what I want to be real, but I wanted to know. So for me, it was always more about the actual practices, the doing.
Mm-hmm. I said I was going to push a little more on what you were like when you entered prison. All right. So what I was saying was, I'm going to push on this. Again, please, you don't feel compelled to answer my questions. But here you are, 18, and you're told your life is over, and you're going to be killed. I mean, I can't even imagine how an 18-year-old processes that. Did you just fall into a depression for X number of years, or what happened to you?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened for the first few years. I started to get really angry also, really sad and really angry. Like I would wake up in the mornings for probably the first couple of years that I was in prison. I would wake up, and the moment that my eyes opened, I would feel anger. I would think they have no right to do this to me. I'm not supposed to be here. Why isn't someone doing something about this? Every moment of the day, I felt like that. And then I started to realize, well, now not only are you in this external hell, but now you've created this internal hell for yourself also. And if you don't want to be a miserable bastard, you're going to have to figure out some way to deal with this. That was a huge part of what drove me with these practices is I didn't want to be that angry person. I didn't want to be miserable. I didn't want to be depressed.
Going back to why you'd wake up angry and who cares? How did you even get to where you cared whether you were angry or not in the morning?
I guess just because I didn't, nobody wants to feel bad. When you feel that way, you become a miserable person. Being angry and being sad, that's not fun. It's not enjoyable. And I guess most of us are just driven to find ways to extract some kind of joy or some kind of enjoyment out of life in some way, even in that situation.
Yeah. And were you confronted at any point with imminent execution, or was that still off in the distance somewhere?
I was given an execution date. My first execution date was May the 5th of, I can't remember if I think it was like 94, 95, something in that time frame. And I came closer to it being carried out than I should have because I had really inept public defenders who didn't realize that they had to file a stay of execution. They thought it was just going to happen automatically. So I came closer to execution than I should have just because of the incompetence of attorneys.
You had a May execution date. How far into your prison sentence?
That was right when I first got there. And I came closer to execution than I should have just because I had incompetent public defenders that didn't realize they had to file for a stay of execution. They thought I was just going to be given one automatically. So I got closer to execution than I should have just because of that.
And were they preparing you for it and that sort of thing? Or was it, you just were so helpless at that point, it's like, what am I supposed to do?
They don't really prepare you. I mean, the only thing they do is they'll usually come get you maybe a couple of days before they're getting ready to kill you. And they take you over to what they call the death house, where they hold you in isolation. They keep you there and kill you. That's the extent of preparation.
Did you get to know any other of the folks on death row there?
Yeah, before I went into solitary confinement for almost the first decade, I used to live with the other guys that were on death row. I think there were When I was there were about 37 of us total, so about 36 other guys on death row, and I knew pretty much all of them. You know, in the beginning, before solitary confinement, we would go to the yard and play chess or checkers or just talk or, you know, whatever it was. And I think during the time I was there, I lost count over the years, but I think about somewhere in the range of 20 to 25 people that I knew over time ended up being executed.
Did you come away with any deeper understanding of that and those people and thoughts?
I guess just to get everything you can out of life, to try to wring every experience you can and every bit of knowledge and beauty and everything that you possibly can out of it, because you never know when it's going to be over.
And has that continued to grow in you since you've been out of prison?
Absolutely. Probably even more so.
All right, we got to wrap this up. What are your final thoughts that you want people to know?
Just that I appreciate everyone who supported us through the years. You know, the people who put on bake sales and held benefit concerts and wrote newspaper articles and created documentaries and everything else. Everyone who had anything to do with supporting us while we were in prison, I appreciate you more than I could possibly say. You are the reason that we didn't give up. You are the reason that I am not dead right now, that I'm actually sitting here talking. I don't take that for granted. And thank you to everyone very much.
Well, the extent that
That's beautiful.
In addition to growing, you can continue to also engage and do good, right? That's part of that growth process.
Absolutely. I think, you know, Beethoven, I always go back to this quote by Beethoven where he said, like, the greatest thing that we could aspire to do is approach divinity as closely as we can, gather its rays, and then disseminate them out to mankind. And we're all going to do that in different ways. Some people are going to do it through music. Some people are going to do it through art. Some people are going to do it through raising kids, whatever it is. That's the way that I try to approach the things I do in my life. I try to, disseminate light.